The rumble of a dozen idling Harleys was the only church music Deacon ever needed. It was a guttural hymn to freedom, a promise of thunder on open roads. But today, the sound was muted, a restless growl contained within the brick walls of the Saints' Den, the unassuming garage that served as the Hells Angels' local chapter headquarters. Chrome gleamed under the low-hanging fluorescent lights, reflecting the grim faces of men who wore their sins and their loyalties stitched onto leather vests. Deacon, the club president, stood over a disassembled engine block, his hands stained with grease, but his mind miles away. His knuckles, a roadmap of scars from 100 brawls and 1,000 miles, tightened on a wrench. He felt a familiar coil of unease in his gut, the same phantom ache that preceded a storm. He was a man built of granite and regret, his authority absolute, his gaze a thing that could strip paint from a wall. Tattoos snaked up his thick neck, disappearing into a close-cropped hairline peppered with gray, each line of ink a chapter in a life lived on the edge. Grizz, his sergeant-at-arms, and the closest thing he had to a brother, shambled in from the alley, wiping his grease-stained hands on an already filthy rag. Grizz was a mountain of a man, his beard a wild, untamed forest where bits of his lunch might go to hibernate. But beneath the intimidating exterior was a perception as sharp as a filleting knife. He'd been outside, enjoying the last rays of a dying afternoon sun, when a kid from the neighborhood had pedaled up on a battered BMX. The boy, a 10-year-old named Finn whose mother ran the corner bakery and always saved the day-old pastries for the club, had a look of puckered concern on his face. Grizz had leaned down, offering a rare, gruff smile. "What's rattling in your cage, little man?" he'd rumbled. Finn, emboldened by the biker's surprisingly gentle tone, pointed a skinny finger down the street, towards the bus stop on the corner of Elm and 7th. "That guy," the boy had whispered, his voice laced with the kind of innocent gravity that adults often dismissed. "He's there every day. He just watches. My mom says he's waiting for a bus that never comes." Grizz had squinted, his eyes following the boy's gesture. He saw a man, unremarkable in a beige windbreaker, standing stiffly by the bench. Nothing overtly threatening. "Lots of folks wait for buses, Finn." The boy shook his head, his conviction unwavering. "No, it's different. He doesn't look at the road. He looks at the houses." And his lips move. "My friend Joey said he heard him once. Said he was picturing kids." The phrase, filtered through the lens of a child's imagination, was bizarre. But the sincerity in Finn's eyes sent a sliver of ice down Grizz's spine. He had clapped the boy on the shoulder. "Good looking out, soldier. We'll keep an eye on it now." Standing before Deacon, Grizz relayed the story. He expected Deacon to brush it off, to tell him he was getting soft, listening to kids' spooky stories. Instead, Deacon's head came up slowly, the wrench in his hand forgotten. The air in the garage grew thick and heavy, charged with a sudden, palpable tension. "Picturing kids?" Deacon's voice was a low growl, the sound of gravel grinding under a heavy tire. It wasn't a question. It was the striking of a match in a room full of gasoline. Grizz just nodded, his own face a grim mask. "That's what the boy said. But I watched him prez. For 20 minutes. The kid's wrong about one thing. He ain't picturing kids. He's looking at one house. Just one. The yellow one with the chipped paint on the porch. And the look on his face, it ain't imagination. It's obsession." Deacon set the wrench down with a metallic clink that echoed in the sudden silence. He wiped his hands, the movements deliberate, final. The phantom ache in his gut had a name now. It was the chilling certainty of a predator scenting its prey. He looked at Grizz, and in that shared glance, a silent vow was made. The rumble of the idling bikes outside suddenly sounded less like a hymn to freedom and more like the promise of a coming war. The rage that began to simmer in Deacon's chest was a familiar fire, one he'd banked for years. It was cold, silent, and utterly unforgiving. Deacon and Grizz began their own watch, not from the street, but from a second-story window of a vacant apartment across the road, a grimy perch secured with a quiet word and a heavy handshake with the building's superintendent, a man who owed the club a significant favor. From this vantage point, The yellow house on Elm Street became a diorama of quiet desperation. The man in the beige windbreaker, who they soon learned was named Silas, was a creature of unnerving habit. He arrived at 3:15 p.m., just as the school buses began their routes, a cruel piece of camouflage. He'd stand there for hours, his posture rigid, his gaze locked onto the house. He was a statue of malice. Through a pair of high-power binoculars, Deacon could see the twitching muscle in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched in his pockets. He wasn't just looking. He was projecting his will, a palpable force of intimidation that seemed to press down on the very roof of the house. Inside that house lived Isabel. They didn't know her name yet. To them, she was just the woman in the window. They saw her only in fleeting glimpses, a shadow passing behind a curtain, a hand quickly drawing a blind. Her movements were furtive, like a mouse trapped in a cage with a sleeping cat. One afternoon, they watched her emerge to take a small bag of trash to the curb. Her shoulders were hunched, her head bowed as if expecting a blow from the sky. She didn't look towards the bus stop. She didn't have to. She could feel him there. As she scurried back inside, her phone, visible in her hand, lit up. A moment later, through the binoculars, Deacon saw Silas across the street lift his own phone to his ear, a cruel, thin smile gracing his lips. He was tormenting her, a puppeteer pulling strings of terror from 100 yards away. "He's got her wired," Grizz muttered, his voice a low growl of disgust. "Text calls. Probably cameras in the damn house." Deacon didn't reply. He was watching Isabel's face, a pale oval of fear briefly visible in the window before the blind snapped shut. In her eyes, he saw a ghost he recognized, a ghost from his own past. The memory hit him like a physical blow, a flashback cutting through the grimy view of the apartment window. He was 20 years younger, his hair black, his tattoos fewer. He was standing in a hospital corridor that smelled of antiseptic and despair. His younger sister, Maya, lay in a bed, her face a constellation of purple and blue bruises, one arm in a cast. Her boyfriend, a man with a charming smile and a hidden temper, had finally dropped the mask. Deacon had arrived too late to stop the beating, but not too late for the aftermath. He remembered the look in Maya's eyes. Not just pain, but a soul-deep shame, a feeling of being utterly and completely alone, trapped. He had sworn a vow that day, a silent promise to the universe that he would never again stand by while a monster hid in plain sight. He had failed his sister in prevention, but he had not failed her in vengeance. The boyfriend disappeared. No one ever asked where. Now, looking at the yellow house, at the flickering shadow of the woman inside, the ghost of Maya was screaming in his ears. This wasn't just a job. It was an exorcism. "We need to know more," Deacon said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion but a chilling resolve. His name, his routine, her name. Everything. "We're not going in blind," Grizz nodded, already pulling out his own burner phone to make a call to a contact in the DMV. "I'll have his plate run. We'll know who this son of a bitch is by sunrise." The sun set on Elm Street, painting the sky in hues of orange and blood red. The streetlights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows. Silas finally departed, melting into the dusk as silently as he had arrived. But his presence lingered, a toxic stain on the quiet suburban street, a promise of darkness that clung to the little yellow house long after he was gone. The next night, the Saint's Den was sealed for church, the Hell's Angels term for a chapter meeting. The bay doors were rolled down, the music was cut, and the air crackled with solemnity. 20 men, clad in leather and denim, sat on overturned crates and worn-out stools around the skeletal frame of a custom chopper. The only light came from a single bare bulb hanging over the center of the room, casting their faces in harsh shadows, making their tattoos writhe like living things. Deacon stood before them, a sentinel of quiet fury. In his hand was a file, thin but heavy with damning information. Grizz's contacts had delivered. The man was Silas Croft. The plates on his nondescript sedan were registered to an address across town, but he had a history. A sealed juvenile record, 2 restraining orders from previous girlfriends that had been mysteriously dropped, and a current occupation as a security consultant for a firm with ties to organized crime. He was a professional predator, shielded by connections and a clean adult record. The woman in the house was Isabel Vance. She had moved in 6 months ago after a messy, unpublicized breakup with Silas. She had no family in the state. She worked from home as a graphic designer. She was, in every sense of the word, isolated. He's got her boxed in. Deacon's voice cut through the silence, each word a chip of ice. She left him, and he won't let her go. He's been parked at that bus stop every day for 3 months. A constant reminder that he's there, that she can't escape. He paused, letting the weight of the situation settle on his brothers. The kid, Finn, he saw the monster, but he didn't know what he was looking at. We do. He looked from face to face, meeting the eyes of each member. There was Roadhog, the grizzled treasurer who could calculate profit margins and break a man's jaw with equal proficiency. There was Sketch, the club artist whose hands were as steady with a tattoo gun as they were with a tire iron. There was Rook, the youngest prospect, his eyes wide but his jaw set with determination. Our charter is about brotherhood. It's about freedom. Deacon continued, his voice dropping lower, becoming more personal. But there's an unwritten rule. We don't let wolves prey on sheep in our backyard. Not on our watch. He didn't need to raise his voice. The quiet intensity was more powerful than any shout. It was then that the past bled into the present again. Deacon's gaze unfocused for a second, and he saw Maya's bruised face superimposed over Rook's eager one. He remembered her quiet sobs in the dark, the way she flinched from every raised hand for years after her ordeal. He remembered the cold, satisfying weight of the chain in his hand the night he'd paid her ex-boyfriend a visit. It was a darkness he carried, a necessary evil he had embraced to protect his own. That darkness was now a tool, honed and ready. This isn't club business. It's not for a patch or for profit. This is about who we are. He looked at Grizz, who stood beside him like a loyal wolf. Silas has connections. This could bring heat. So we vote. All in, or we stand down. No judgment, Grizz stepped forward. I'm in. For the kid who saw something and said something. For the woman who can't one by one, they stood. Roadhog grunted, and Sketch cracked his knuckles. In Rook, his voice clear and strong. I'm in, Prez. The vote was unanimous. A chorus of guttural assents that sealed Silas Croft's fate. The mood in the room shifted. The somber tension was replaced by a focused energy, the quiet hum of a well-oiled machine of war preparing for battle. Deacon unrolled a crude, hand-drawn map of the neighborhood on the workbench. All right, let's go to work. Grizz, I want his daily routine mapped to the minute. Sketch, you and Rook get eyes on the back of the house. Find blind spots. Roadhog, I need you to find out everything you can about his security firm. Who are his friends? Who are his enemies? We need leverage. The men gathered around the map, their large, scarred hands pointing out routes, exits, and vulnerabilities. The dark biker wit, a gallows humor that thrived in the face of danger, began to surface. Think he's got a dog? Sketch asked. Hope so. Roadhog grunted. I'm hungry. The quip cut the tension, but didn't diminish the gravity. They were planning an extraction, a military-style operation fueled by gasoline and righteous fury. For Deacon, it was more than that. It was a chance to silence the ghost in the hospital corridor, to balance the scales that had been tipped against his sister so long ago. It was a chance to prove that the monsters didn't always win. The first challenge was monumental. How to breach Silas's wall of technological and psychological control to make contact with Isabel. A direct approach was impossible. Knocking on her door would be a death sentence, alerting Silas and giving him cause to move her, to bury her even deeper in his world of fear. The plan needed to be as subtle as a whisper, yet as clear as a scream. It was Sketch, the artist, who came up with the idea. His talent wasn't just in ink, it was in observation and imitation. Utility worker, he said, tapping the map. Every third Tuesday, a guy from the city comes to read the water meters. He wears a standard blue uniform, carries a clipboard. He's in and out in 90 seconds. Nobody looks twice. The plan was audacious. Sketch, who was wiry and could pass for a civic employee if you squinted, would take the place of the meter reader. The real reader would be intercepted a few blocks away, handsomely compensated for an unexpected 2-hour lunch break, and relieved of his uniform and clipboard. The risk was immense. If Silas was watching via an internal camera, or if a neighbor noticed the switch, the entire operation could be compromised. They spent 2 days rehearsing. Grizz, playing the part of a nosy neighbor, would time Sketch's approach, his walk, the way he fumbled with the clipboard. Rook was stationed a block away, ready to create a minor traffic incident to distract Silas at the critical moment. The package was a simple, elegant piece of engineering. A burner phone, no bigger than a credit card, taped inside a hollowed-out energy bar wrapper and tucked into a plain white envelope. On the envelope, a single word was written in neat, block letters: hope. The day of the operation arrived with a low, gray sky that threatened rain. The air was heavy, mirroring the mood of the team. Deacon was in the van, his eyes glued to the binocular feed. He watched Silas assume his post at the bus stop, a sentinel of suburban dread. He watched Sketch, transformed in his blue uniform, begin his walk down the block. "Rook, you're on in 5. Deacon's voice crackled over the radio. 4 blocks away, Rook pulled his bike out in front of a city bus, pretending to stall. The immediate blast of a horn and screech of brakes was the overture. As heads on the street turned towards the commotion, Sketch made his move. He walked with a practiced, board gait up Isabel's driveway. He knelt by the water meter on the side of the house, his back to the street, shielding his movements. He fumbled, dropped the envelope near the foundation, partially hidden by a shrub, then pretended to finish his reading and walked away. The entire sequence took less than 70 seconds. From his perch, Deacon watched Silas, who had barely glanced at the commotion before his gaze snapped back to the house, his focus unbroken. He hadn't seen a thing. An hour passed, then 2. The envelope remained by the shrub. A knot of anxiety tightened in Deacon's chest. What if she didn't see it? What if she was too afraid to even step outside? Just as despair began to set in, the side door of the house cracked open. Isabel emerged, carrying a small watering can. Her movements were stiff with terror. She watered a potted plant near the door, her eyes darting around nervously. Then, in a movement so swift it was almost missed, she bent down, her hand disappearing into the shrub for a split second. When she stood up, the envelope was gone. Back inside, with the door bolted and a chair wedged under the knob, Isabel's hands trembled so violently she could barely tear the envelope open. Inside, the burner phone felt alien and heavy. She stared at the word hope. It was a concept she had long since abandoned, a foreign word from a language she no longer spoke. Just as a flicker of that alien feeling ignited within her, her real phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Silas. Who was that? Her blood ran cold. He had seen Sketch. Or he was guessing. She typed back with shaking fingers. Water meter guy? Who cares? The 3 dots that indicated he was typing seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then his reply. I care. I care about everything that comes near you. Don't forget that. A picture followed. It was a photo of the front of her house, taken from his position at the bus stop. A clear, high-resolution warning. He was always watching. The small flicker of hope was nearly extinguished by the tidal wave of fear. But it wasn't gone completely. Later that night, hidden in her bathroom with the fan roaring to cover any sound, she turned on the burner phone. A single, pre-written text was on the screen. We see you. We can help. Are you ready to be free? Tears streamed down her face as she typed a single, desperate word. Yes. The single-word reply was a declaration of war. The moment Deacon saw yes appear on his own burner phone, the entire operation shifted from reconnaissance to extraction. The communication, however, was fraught with peril. Isabel could only risk using the phone in the dead of night, huddled in the bathroom, the sound of the extractor fan a flimsy shield against Silas's omnipresent surveillance. Their text exchanges were brief, frantic, and terrifying. He has cameras, she typed one night. In the living room and kitchen. Audio, too. I think the smoke detectors. The information confirmed their worst fears. Silas wasn't just an obsessed ex. He was a professional jailer who had turned her home into a high-tech prison. Grizz and Sketch, using blueprints of the house model they'd found online, marked the likely locations of the devices. They were building a tactical map of her cage. "We can't go in through the front," Sketch stated, tracing a line around the back of the house. "The only blind spot is the small window in the downstairs bathroom. It's high, but it's possible." Through their stilted communication, they began to formulate a plan. They would go in through the bathroom window on Saturday night, when the neighbors were more likely to be out or distracted. Isabel's role was simple. At 2 a.m., she was to go into the bathroom, lock the door, and wait. But Silas was a creature of paranoia and instinct. He felt the subtle shift in the currents of fear that connected him to her. Isabel, buoyed by the fragile hope of rescue, was no longer perfectly compliant. A spark of defiance had been lit, and he could smell the smoke. On Friday afternoon, his usual passive vigil at the bus stop was broken. Isabel's phone rang, not with a text, but a call. His voice was unervingly calm, a silky poison. "Pack a bag, my love," he said. "Just a few things. For the weekend. We're going on a trip. A little getaway, just the two of us. To that cabin by the lake we used to love. Remember?" Isabel's heart stopped. The cabin. It was a place of nightmares, a secluded little cottage miles from anywhere, with no cell service and no neighbors. It was where he had first shown his true colors, where a romantic weekend had devolved into a terrifying ordeal of psychological abuse after she'd talked to a friendly waiter at a local diner. It was his ultimate place of control. "Silas, no, I can't. I have work," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "Your work can wait," he purred. "I'll be there at 9 tonight to pick you up. Be ready." The line went dead. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. She fumbled for the burner phone, her fingers barely able to type. "He knows. He's moving me. Tonight, 9 p.m., cabin by the lake." The message landed like a grenade in the Saints' Denver. The Saturday plan was shattered. Their window, already small, was now slamming shut. "He's spooked," Deacon snarled, slamming his fist on the workbench. "He feels her pulling away, and he's yanking the chain. Taking her where she's completely cut off." The atmosphere in the garage became a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Maps were thrown aside, new plans shouted over the roar of a bike engine being tested. They had hours, not days. Roadhog, who had been digging into Silas's criminal connections, delivered a crucial piece of intel. The security firm he works for is a front for the Petrov crime family. They handle enforcement. Silas is one of their top dogs, but he's been skimming. Word on the street is that he's made enemies within the organization. They're just looking for an excuse to clean house. A dark, predatory smile touched Deacon's lips. An idea, brutal and elegant, began to form. They didn't just need to get Isabel out. They needed to make sure Silas could never come after her. They could use his own corruption against him. "Change of plans," Deacon announced, his voice cutting through the noise. "We're not just springing her. We're setting a trap for him. Grizz, Sketch, you're still on extraction. But you're moving now. Get to the house. Wait for my signal. Roadhog, you're with me. We're going to pay a visit to the Petrovs." It was a desperate, high-stakes gamble. They would be walking into the lion's den to report on one of their own. But if it worked, Silas wouldn't just be dealing with a handful of bikers. He'd be facing the wrath of his own ruthless employers. The plan was no longer just about rescue. It was about annihilation. The night fell like a black shroud over the city. The rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall, a cold, persistent drizzle that slicked the streets and blurred the streetlights in a hazy coronas. It was perfect weather for ghosts and hunters. While Deacon and Roadhog roared off on their Harleys, their engines cutting through the wet air on a diplomatic mission to hell, Grizz and Sketch led a smaller, quieter team toward Elm Street. They moved not on loud bikes, but in a nondescript panel van, the kind that blended in with the urban landscape, its interior filled with ropes, tools, and grim-faced men. They parked 3 blocks away from the yellow house and proceeded on foot, wraiths of leather and denim melting into the deep shadows of the rain-soaked neighborhood. Their movements were fluid, practiced, a silent ballet of impending violence. They took up positions in the overgrown yard behind the house, concealed by a thicket of unkempt hedges. The bathroom window was just as Sketch had described, small, high, and dark. The rain masked any sound they made. Inside the house, Isabel was living a nightmare. She had packed a small duffel bag under Silas's watchful eye, his presence filling her small home like a toxic gas. He sat in her living room, on her couch, watching her with a proprietary smirk. The camera and the smoke detector above him blinked its tiny red eye, a silent testament to his dominion. He was calm, exuding a terrifying confidence that shredded her nerves. He was toying with her, enjoying her fear. "You seem tense," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "You should be excited. It's been too long since we had some quality time." Just us. Isabel could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. Her mind was a frantic prayer, a repeating mantra of please, please, please. She kept glancing at the clock on the wall. 8:45 p.m. Time was running out. Meanwhile, across town, Deacon and Roadhog stood in the back room of a smoky, opulent Russian restaurant. The air was thick with the smell of expensive vodka and simmering violence. They were unarmed, a sign of respect and suicidal confidence. Across a heavy mahogany table sat Dmitri Petrov, the patriarch of the family, a man whose placid, grandfatherly face belied a heart of Arctic ice. Two hulking guards stood behind him, their hands tucked inside their suit jackets. "You are brave men, or very foolish men, to request this meeting," Dmitri said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Deacon met his gaze without flinching. "We're here about a mutual problem." Silas Croft, at the mention of the name, a flicker of interest appeared in Dimitri's cold eyes. "He works for you," Deacon continued, "but he also works for himself. He's been skimming off your collections for months, and his extracurricular activities are drawing the wrong kind of attention. The kind that brings cops and federal agents." Roadhog slid a small, discreet flash drive across the polished table. "Proof," he grunted. "Bank statements, ledgers. He's gotten sloppy. And a detailed account of his stalking of an innocent woman. He's unstable. A liability. Bad for business." Dmitri picked up the flash drive, rolling it between his thumb and forefinger. He didn't need to look at it. The fact that they had it was enough. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. "It seems Mr. Croft has become a loose end. And we do not like loose ends." He looked at Deacon. "You want the woman. You take her. But Silas Croft, he belongs to us now. You will deliver him to the old shipyard on Pier 4. We will terminate his employment." The signal was given. Back in the van, Deacon's burner phone lit up with a simple message for Grizz. Green light. Deliver the package. It was 8:55 p.m. The diversion was no longer needed. This was now a direct assault. Grizz gave the hand signal. Two of his men produced a powerful, industrial-grade suction cup with a handle. They placed it on the glass of the bathroom window. A quick, sharp pull, and the entire pane of glass came out with a muffled pop, the sound lost in the drumming of the rain. The trap was set. The extraction began with a whisper of displaced air. Sketch, the most agile of the crew, was boosted up to the open bathroom window. He slithered through the opening like a cat, landing silently on the tiled floor. The house was deathly quiet except for the low murmur of Silas's voice from the living room and the drumming of the rain. Sketch crept to the bathroom door, his ear pressed against the wood. He could hear Silas talking, his voice a low, menacing purr. "It's almost time to go, Isabel. Time to leave all this behind." Sketch slowly, carefully, turned the lock on the bathroom door. A faint click echoed in the small space. A sound he prayed was inaudible over the other noises of the night. He gave a thumbs up to Grizz, who was now climbing through the window behind him. They were in. In the living room, Isabel stood frozen, her duffel bag clutched in her white-knuckled hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and hope. Silas stood up, stretching like a predator after a long nap. "Let's go. My car is out front." He reached for her arm, his fingers cold and strong. It was the touch she had grown to dread, the touch that meant ownership, control. But this time, something was different. The knowledge that help was just feet away, that the silent prayer in her heart had been answered, gave her a surge of strength she hadn't felt in years. As his fingers closed around her arm, she didn't just flinch. She reacted. With a strangled cry, she ripped her arm away and shoved him hard. The move was pure instinct, a cornered animal finally biting back. It caught Silas completely by surprise. He stumbled backward, his face a mask of shock, which quickly morphed into incandescent rage. "You little," he started, lunging for her. That was the moment Grizz chose to make his entrance. He didn't just open the hallway door. He kicked it off its hinges. The sound was like a thunderclap inside the small house. The door exploded inward, crashing against the far wall. Grizz filled the doorway, a behemoth of leather and fury, his eyes burning with cold fire. Sketch and two other bikers, moving with terrifying speed and coordination, fanned out behind him, cutting off all escape routes. Silas froze, his lunge forgotten. His brain, so adept at calculating threats, struggled to process the impossible sight before him. Hell's Angels, here, in his carefully controlled sanctuary. His expression shifted from rage to disbelief, then to the dawning horror of a predator who has just realized it has wandered into a dragon's lair. "What the hell is this?" he snarled, his voice losing its silky confidence, replaced by a raw, guttural edge. "Who are you?" Grizz took a slow step into the room, his boots crunching on the debris of the shattered door. His lips peeled back from his teeth in a smile that held no humor. "We're the guys you don't fuck with," he growled. "And this is a private party. You're not invited anymore." While Silas was transfixed by the mountain of a man in front of him, Sketch moved with silent grace along the wall, placing himself between Silas and Isabel. He gently took her arm. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice calm and steady amidst the chaos. "We've got you. Go with him." He nodded towards the third biker, Rook, who was waiting by the ruined doorway. Rook, his face set and serious, wrapped a protective arm around Isabel's shoulders and began guiding her out of the room, away from the impending storm. The sight of her being led away broke Silas's paralysis. A primal roar of fury erupted from his chest. "No, she's mine." He launched himself, not at Grizz, but at Sketch, trying to get to Isabel. It was a fatal mistake. He underestimated their speed, their cohesiveness. He was moving in a straight line. They were a whirlwind. The living room became a vortex of violence. Silas was big and strong, used to winning fights through brute force and intimidation, but he was one man against a pack of wolves. His desperate lunge at Sketch was met not by a man, but by a wall. Grizz intercepted him mid-stride, his arm shooting out like a piston, his hand clamping on Silas's throat. The impact lifted Silas off his feet, his forward momentum brought to an immediate, bone-jarring halt. He slammed back against the wall, a choked gasp escaping his lips as Grizz's thumb pressed into his windpipe. "She's not a thing," Grizz snarled, his face inches from Silas's, his breath smelling of whiskey and rage. "She doesn't belong to you. She doesn't belong to anyone." Silas's hands came up, clawing at the iron grip on his neck. His eyes, wide with panic and fury, bulged. He tried to bring a knee up, but Sketch was already there, delivering a single, precise, disabling strike to the side of his thigh. Silas's leg buckled, the nerve screaming with white-hot pain. He sagged in Grizz's grip, his strength failing. This wasn't a barroom brawl. It was a systematic dismantling. While Grizz and Sketch neutralized the immediate threat, Rook was already escorting Isabel out the back of the house, through the yard, and towards the waiting panel van. She moved in a daze, the sounds of the struggle behind her muffled by the rain and the roaring in her own ears. The cold, wet air on her face felt like the first breath after being held underwater for too long. Back in the house, the fight was almost over. Silas, gasping for air, made one last, desperate move. He twisted, breaking part of Grizz's hold, and his hand darted inside his windbreaker, fumbling for the small, snub-nosed revolver he always carried. But Deacon had anticipated this. He had entered the house silently behind his men, a wraith in the chaos. Just as Silas's fingers found the grip of his weapon, Deacon's hand clamped down on his wrist, squeezing with crushing force. Bones grated against each other. Silas cried out, a high, sharp sound of agony, and the gun clattered to the floor. Deacon kicked it away. "You were sloppy," Deacon said, his voice a low, conversational tone that was more terrifying than any shout. "You made enemies, and you brought your sickness to our town." He twisted Silas's arm up behind his back at an unnatural angle. "This ends tonight." All of it, the fight was over. Silas was subdued, his face a mask of pain, defeat, and utter confusion. He was bound swiftly and efficiently with thick zip ties. A strip of duct tape was slapped over his mouth, silencing his stream of threats and curses. The bikers moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning up the scene. The broken door was propped back in place. The gun was retrieved. Within minutes, it was as if they had never been there, save for the man trussed up on the floor. Grizz hauled Silas to his feet. "Package is ready for delivery," he grunted into his radio. They dragged him out of the house, a sack of defeated pride and impotent rage, and threw him into the back of the panel van, which had been brought around to the front of the house. As the van doors slammed shut, Deacon took one last look at the little yellow house. The lights were off. It was just a house again, no longer a prison. The rain was starting to let up, washing the street clean. He got on his bike, the engine roaring to life with a satisfying growl. He led the small convoy away from Elm Street, leaving silence in their wake. They drove through the glistening, dark city towards the industrial wasteland of the shipyards. At Pier 4, a black sedan with tinted windows was waiting, its engine idling. Dmitri Petrov's men, Grizz and Sketch, hauled Silas out of the van and dumped him on the wet asphalt at their feet. The men in suits didn't speak. They simply opened the trunk of their car, and one of them looked at Deacon and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was a confirmation, a closing of contract. The bikers mounted their Harleys and rode away, the rumble of their engines fading into the night. They didn't look back. They didn't need to. They knew that Silas Croft would never be seen or heard from again. He had been delivered to a far worse fate than any they could have devised. Isabel was not taken to the clubhouse. She was taken to a small, secluded house nestled in the hills outside the city. It belonged to Maria, Roadhog's wife, a woman with a spine of steel and eyes that held a universe of empathy. The house was a sanctuary, filled with the scent of baking bread and drying herbs, a world away from the sterile fear of her former home. When Rook brought her inside, she was trembling, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, still clutching the duffel bag as if it were a life raft. Maria approached her not with pity, but with a quiet, steady strength. She took the bag from Isabel's hands. "You won't need this anymore," she said gently. "You're safe now. Let's get you warm." The first few days were a blur for Isabel. She slept for hours, a deep, exhausted sleep haunted by formless nightmares. When she was awake, she moved through the house like a ghost, flinching at sudden noises, speaking only in whispers. Maria never pushed. She simply existed in the space with her, a constant, reassuring presence. She brought her hot tea and bowls of soup, sat with her in silence on the porch overlooking the valley, and spoke of gardening, of books, of anything and everything but Silas. It was on the third day that Deacon came. He arrived alone, his Harley a distant rumble that grew into a respectful idle at the end of the long driveway. He walked up to the porch where Isabel was sitting, wrapped in another of Maria's blankets. He didn't loom over her. He pulled up a wooden chair, sitting so that they were at eye level, the setting sun at his back. He was a terrifying figure in his leather cut, his face a roadmap of a hard life. But his eyes, when they met hers, held no menace. They held a quiet, profound understanding. "He's gone," Deacon said, his voice a low rumble. "He will never bother you again. That's a promise." Isabel looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. She saw the tattoos, the scars, the intimidating bulk of him. But she also saw the weariness around his eyes, the weight of the things he carried. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you help me?" Deacon was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting towards the horizon. The ghost of Maya flickered in his memory. Because no one should have to live in a cage, he said finally. And because good people stood by and did nothing for someone I cared about a long time ago. My brothers and I, we don't stand by. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. It was a cashier's check for a significant amount of money. A new start, he explained, from a business transaction that recently concluded. The house is being sold. The proceeds are yours. Go somewhere new. Be someone new. Or be the person you were before he tried to extinguish your light. Tears welled in Isabel's eyes. But for the first time in years, they were not tears of fear or sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude, of a dam of pent-up emotion finally breaking. I don't know how to thank you, she sobbed. You don't have to, Deacon said, his voice softening. Just live. Live well. That's all the thanks we need. He stood up, his visit concluded. As he turned to leave, Isabel found her voice again, stronger this time. What was his name? Deacon paused. Who? The boy, she said. The one who saw a rare, small smile touched Deacon's lips. His name is Finn, he said. And he's a good kid. He walked back to his bike, the leather of his vest creaking with the movement. He swung a leg over the saddle, and with a deafening roar that echoed through the hills, he was gone, a knight in scarred armor riding back into the gathering dark. Isabel sat on the porch, the check clutched in her hand, and watched until his taillight was just another star in the distance. The world was suddenly vast and full of possibility. The cage was gone. She was free. 6 months later, the city of Seattle felt like a different world to the woman who now called herself Anna. Isabel Vance was a ghost, a name on a pile of legal documents in a dusty records office. Anna was real. She had used the money from Deacon not to run, but to rebuild. She had moved into a small, bright apartment in a lively part of the city, a place filled with the sounds of traffic, music, and laughter, the sounds of life. The fear was not entirely gone. It was a faint scar, a reminder of the darkness she had survived. But it no longer controlled her. She had taken self-defense classes, not just to learn how to fight, but to reclaim her own physical space, to feel strong in her own skin. She had found a new job at a downtown marketing firm, and more importantly, she had started volunteering at a women's shelter, the very place she might have ended up if not for a group of unlikely saviors. She listened to the stories of other women, her heart aching with empathy, and offered them the same thing that had been offered to her, a flicker of hope. She told them they were strong, that they could escape, that they deserved to be free. She never told them her own story, not in detail. She never mentioned the roaring engines or the men in leather. It was a secret she held close, a sacred, violent miracle that belonged to her alone. One crisp autumn afternoon, she was walking home from the shelter, a bag of groceries in her arm. The sun was warm on her face. As she waded across a busy intersection, a sound cut through the city noise, a deep, guttural, familiar rumble. A group of a dozen Hell's Angels roared past, a thunderous procession of chrome and leather. They were a terrifying, magnificent sight. For a fleeting second, a jolt of the old fear went through her. But it was quickly replaced by something else. Gratitude, a sense of a debt she could never repay. At the head of the pack, she recognized the broad-shouldered silhouette of Deacon. He didn't see her. He was looking straight ahead, leading his brothers down the open road. As they passed, a young woman on the corner with her boyfriend audibly gasped, "God, they're so scary." Anna smiled a small, secret smile. "Sometimes," she whispered to herself, "they're angels." She crossed the street and continued on her way, her step a little lighter, her head held a little higher. She was a survivor. She was a warrior. She was free. Back at the Saint's Den, the mood was relaxed. The bikes were parked, the beer was cold, and the stereo was playing old rock and roll. Grizz was arguing with Sketch about the best way to tune a carburetor, while Roadhog counted the week's earnings in the back office. Deacon was outside, leaning against the brick wall, smoking a cigarette and watching the world go by. He saw Finn, the baker's boy, pedal past on his BMX, a little older, a little more confident. The boy saw him and gave a Johnny wave. Deacon nodded back, a flicker of a smile on his face. The kid had no idea what he had started, the chain of events his innocent observation had set in motion. He had seen a flicker of darkness and had the courage to point it out. In doing so, he had saved a life. Grizz came out and stood beside him, handing him a cold beer. "Good day," Grizz grunted. "Good day," Deacon agreed, taking a long drink. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two old soldiers surveying their small kingdom. Their world was violent and dangerous. Their hands were not clean. They were outlaws, pariahs, the men that polite society feared. But they had a code, a line they would not cross, and a purpose that went beyond themselves. They were the monsters who hunted other monsters. "You ever think about her?" Grizz asked quietly. Deacon knew who he meant. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Hope she's okay. She's okay," Grizz said with certainty. "Wolves like us, we know how to make sure of it." Deacon took another drag from his cigarette, the smoke curling up into the evening sky. He thought of his sister, Maya, who was now married with 2 kids of her own, her scars faded but not forgotten. He thought of Isabel or Anna, wherever she was, living her life in the light. The rage was still there, banked deep inside him, but tonight it was quiet. The ghosts were silent. The scales felt, for a moment, balanced. The roar of a bike starting up inside the garage was his call to action, his hymn. There were always more roads to ride, more storms to face, and more darkness to push back. And as long as he and his brothers drew breath, they would be there to meet it. If you or someone you know is a victim of abuse, please know there is help, and there are people who will fight for you. Share this story if you believe in the power of unlikely heroes, and comment below with your thoughts on the unbreakable bond of brotherhood.